Hi, I'm David Wiseman, and this is whisperstolive.com. In my last video, I talked about how the self develops in the context of an intimate relationship, intimate human relationship, where the conditions of vulnerability and vigilance are absolutely necessary and critical. These conditions of vulnerability and vigilance are deeply, deeply rooted in all of our psyches. And they will surface at various times in our lives with varying degrees of intensity. And that is why it's so important when we talk about having a healthy self that we take these conditions into account. Now today I am going to talk about the critical role of memory and language in the development of self. Let's consider first memory. How do you know that you're the same person now as you were when you were a child? Well, I would agree that in many ways, you and I are very different now than we were as children. We have different brains, we have different bodies, we think differently, we act differently. But somehow, when we look back in our past, we can know with certainty that, and when we're thinking about ourselves as children, that was me as a child, and this is me now. That continuity of experience, that continuity to be able to say that way back then and right now, it's still me. That continuity is necessary for selfhood. And it would not be possible if we did not have the capacity for memory. If we didn't have memories, we wouldn't be able to learn. If we didn't have memories, we wouldn't have a self. That's important. Okay, so let's consider once again the relationship between caregiver and infant. The infant is at the mercy of an all-powerful caregiver. And thankfully, we as adults are drawn to an infant, especially our own. We do not want anything to happen to an infant. We see their vulnerability. I can say that when I held my daughter, when she was a tiny infant, I looked down at her little fingers, her beautiful face. I just wanted to protect her, hold her close. That's important in the development of selfhood because you have a caregiver who is drawn to the infant, paying attention and being vigilant that the infant should not encounter any dangers. And you have an infant who is attentive to the caregiver. It is within that relationship that the self develops. Now, the infant, as the infant grows, will have a capacity to learn more and more, ever more complex. That's due to memory. Now consider language. Consider a caregiver looking down into an infant's eyes, their infant's eyes. What do you think when you get that picture in your mind? Well, I can tell you what I believe most people think, or most people can relate to, is the caregiver looking down at the infant and saying, "Daddy, Daddy," or "Mommy," or "I love you, I love you." And the infant just looking up at the caregiver, absorbing it, taking it all in. That is how language develops. It's within the context of vulnerability and vigilance that we can learn language. Now, can you imagine having a thought without being able to describe it? Without being able to describe it? It's almost impossible. In fact, I would argue that you couldn't even identify a thought without language. Because language provides the structure for thought. It provides the structure for thinking. That's critical when we consider how the self develops. Because when I say to you, "What is the self?" you will think about it, and you will use language to describe that. If I ask you, "Who are you?" you would use language to communicate your understanding of who you are, yourself. So these 4 ideas, the conditions of vulnerability and vigilance within the context of an intimate human relationship, allow, because of memory, the development of language. And language forms the structure for our thoughts. In order to have a self, you need to be able to remember, and you need to have language. You cannot develop language without being in a relationship. I think I'm going to leave it there for today. But next week, I'm going to talk about how the self develops within an existential moral space. We're getting real close now to be able to talk about how we can live healthier lives, how we can act differently and think differently once we understand how the self is formed. If you like this video, please hit the like button and also subscribe. I'm David Wiseman. Until next time, this is whisperstolive.com. Bye for now.